Hello, Legacy Legion. It's been a week since the last video, and today we are wrapping up the coverage for Season 1 of the Legacy of the North League with a title match between the winner of our Invitational, Boston, and his opponent being the point leader of the season, Wajih. Like I said, they're playing for a title match, and this is the very first King of the North match, and it comes with a few perks for the next season, mainly being able to play free Legacy events at select stores around Southern Ontario. And to help me celebrate this exciting occasion, I will be joined by my friend Kevin, who will be helping me cover this Grixis Tempo mirror match. Kevin, did you want to say a few words before we get into the thick of things?
Hey guys, I'm Kevin Fang. Some of you've probably seen me around before. I play Legacy occasionally, and mostly my specialty is Death and Taxes, but I do dabble here and there with other decks, and we got two really great players in front of us today, so pretty excited to be here. Thanks for having me on, Ben.
Yeah, anytime. Hopefully this becomes a regular occurrence and hopefully everyone enjoys it. So we're just going to go straight into game one here. We're going to check out the mulligans. I'm going to apologize in advance here for you guys. I know when we do hand cams before, it's kind of easy to tell who's who, but we're kind of in the same positions and it's going to get a little bit confusing. So the hand that you just saw was Wajih's hand. And it looks like they're both keeping their sevens. So Waji's going to start off with a Misty Rainforest into Volcanic Island and casting a Dragon's Reach Channeler into Mishra's Bauble. Kevin, why do we see Mishra's Bauble in Delver decks?
So I think Mishra's Bauble is mostly it serves as an artifact type to help turn on Delirium for the Dragon's Rage Channeler, and you also get a free Surveil, which can help set up a lot of your hand selection, which is one of the keys in this matchup for sure.
Awesome. So I know that, or I think people that are already enfranchised in Legacy, we understand that Delver is a top deck, right? I think it's been kind of known for quite a while.
Yeah, that's true.
Why is that?
I think the quality of the cards is just it's the quality of the cards is fairly high. You're playing no nonsense cards, and because your spells all cost very little mana, you can punish people for stumbling. You're playing things like Daze, which force people to kind of you're playing these cheap 1 mana threats that force your opponent very quickly of cards like Daze that can punish them for trying to do so. And you kind of just go under people very quickly and very easily. And with a lot of card selection like Brainstorm and Ponder, you can always sort of look for the tools that will be effective in a given matchup. It's just a very tightly put together deck, I think.
Awesome. So we're gonna take a look here at Boston's hand, and he opts to go for a Misty Rainforest and cracking the fetch land to play a Lightning Bolt here. So we also just saw that he drew a Wasteland for the turn. Is there any reason why you want to bolt the Dragon's Reach Channeler before trying to take away your opponent's mana?
So the main thing about wastelanding in this matchup is that if Boston were to wasteland here, because Wajir already had first crack with the volcanic island, he's kind of just setting himself back because Wajir is a threat in play, and they're kind of resetting the game. Like Delver likes that. That's the main reason they play wasteland is they try to get out of the board, and then they just trade down resources, and then they have the threat when all the dust settles. So Boston, I think, is he's very astutely I think he's just going to keep playing his lands out, and Wasteland here is most likely going to serve as a way to cut off Underground Sea because of how powerful and annoying Orcish Bowmasters is. So we're probably going to see him try to aim the Wasteland at a
All right, cool. So we'll talk about Bowmasters later on, but now we're seeing Boston deep in the tank here. See, like looking down this Delver that Wajih just played, we see that he has double Ponder, double Force of Will. Is it smart to fire off Force of Wills, or are there specific targets that like each of the players should be Force of Willing in this matchup? Because it is a mirror match. I think there's only a 1 card difference between both of their main decks, and because this is a best of 5 match, they're going to be playing 2 pre-boarded games, and then game 3 will be sideboards. So are there like specific cards and specific threats that Force of Will should be dedicated for, or is it like a kind of a situational type thing?
So I think in general, Force of Will is not very good in the Delver Mirror because you have to trade 2 cards off to answer your opponent's card. But because this is pre-sideboard, they don't really have much choice. It's in their deck. Um, I think Force of Will is primarily going to be trying to answer cards that you otherwise just don't have very good answers to. For example, Orcish Bowmasters is quite good because it makes these ones like Delver Secrets and Non-Delirious Dragon's Rage Chandler. So you see here that Boston is just slamming the Orcish Bowmasters through it, even though he knows that Daze is a very important card in this matchup, and he knows that he can get dazed here. But the Force of Will has such high upside that if it resolves, he gets to clear a threat out of Wajih's board, and he gets to make 2 bodies and stop Wajih from getting comfortably. But yeah, I think pre-board Force of Will is mostly going to go at cards like Murktide Regent, because if Murktide resolves and it's bigger than a 6/6, you don't really have good ways to get it anymore. So Murktide Regent is the primary Force of Will target before sideboarding.
Yeah, okay. You kind of cut out there, so I just wanted to make sure you said Murktide region is probably the go-to
The
threat
number
for
one.
the Force of Will. Cool.
Yeah,
So,
that's correct.
speaking about how you touched on Orcish Bowmasters earlier, we're seeing an Orcish Bowmaster from Boston, and we see Wajih also has an Orcish Bowmaster. I know there's a lot of talk around this card, and a very common saying is that the first person to play their Bowmasters first is usually the one losing that war. Is that true?
I'm actually not sure. I think if you get to kill something with a bowmaster, or you get to snag your opponent's brainstorm or something like that, then it's not too bad. Like here, Boston already got a Delver for his trouble. So even if Wajih plays his bowmaster to kill Boston's bowmaster, I think the trade is still pretty okay, right? Because he already got a card for it. So
Yeah, so now we're seeing Boston has his board, he has the Bowmaster, it resolved successfully, killed the Delver, and now he's going after Wajih's resources here, right? He's
mhm.
used the Wasteland to target the volcanic island, and Wajih's now responding with his own Orcish Bowmasters, killing Boston's Orcish Bowmasters. So I think they're just going back and forth here, no?
Yeah, so this is going to be Wajih's bowmaster's killing Boston's, and Boston kind of shows the unholy heat here. But yeah,
I
this
think he
this
takes it
is obviously
he takes it back, yeah.
yeah, he takes it back. But it is a prime target for Heat here, obviously, since especially with 2 and he does not want to let Wajih just ping him for free.
Yeah. So he ends up actually just firing off the unholy heat. I think he was just waiting for Wajih to complete the full effect on Bowmasters entering the battlefield and amassing the orc.
Mhm.
So I think who is situated better here? We have Boston with 2 ponders in hand, and Wajih I know for sure has the spell pierce, but I think he also has his own unholy heat. So
I think Boston is slightly better off here since he has the card selection. I'm not entirely sure how Wajih will be able to use the spell pierce effectively. If he can get a remove like a key removal spell with the spell pierce, it could be good. But Boston here pondering into multiple lands means that the spell pierce is likely to not be effective going forward.
yeah. Okay. So you said earlier that also Wajih cracks the Mishra's Bauble just to get an extra draw. Boston shows one of the lands that he revealed off the ponder. But you said you were talking earlier when we were talking about the Force of Wills, how Daze is an incredibly important card in this matchup. Do you think Daze is more important than the Force of Wills?
I think Daze is definitely more important than Force of Will in this particular matchup because you're fairly landlight, and there's a lot of fighting with these 1 mana spells. And but what actually happens in this matchup, I think, is that the 2 mana spells decide the game. Like these cards like Bowmasters, Murktide Regent, and post sideboard we'll see some 2 mana spells as well. You really want to have Daze to be able to fight efficiently because it's essentially a free counter, right?
Yeah.
You want to have these kinds of free counters that don't cost you a second card, so that you can fight against your opponent's powerhouses. And so here we see the mana advantage kind of taking over, where Boston has 3 lands comfortably in play, and he has the threat, and which you just cannot find land 2 here.
Yeah, so Boston finding the Dragon's Reach Chandler, slamming it last turn, passes to Wajih. Wajih just kind of draws his card and passes back. At what point Oh, he's light on the red mana, so the Unholy Heat in Waji's hand is kind of just stranded there. So we see Boston has the Murktide, and it's gonna come straight down. Waji has tons of interaction in his hand with Daze, Spell Pierce, Force of Will, and two other spells. I think that's his own Murktide in his hand there. But
Yeah, that's right.
considering pitching the Daze for the Force of Will, Daze over Spell Pierce is this is this something that's normal? Is it because Waji only has the one land?
Yeah, I think, and also because I think this days is just wearing off in effectiveness anyways, because all the 2 mana spells will be able, Boston will be able to pay for days through for anything,
Mm,
but Spell Pierce could stop like a, something into a brainstorm, or maybe a ponder into a threat, or not ponder into a threat, ponder into a removal spell, something like that. I think the decision here is pretty marginal which one to pitch, but yeah,
yeah.
I think
Okay, so for those people, I'm sure that most of the viewers who are going to be seeing this are already enfranchised Legacy players. But if anyone new to Legacy is out there who thinks that Legacy is a turn one or turn two format, it's very more often than not a non-combo format. Like there are a lot of powerful combos, a lot of decks do have combo finishers, but a lot of decks do go longer than 1 to 2 turns. And we're seeing it here in this Delver matchup, which is probably arguably one of the most popular, most common archetypes that you'll see just due to Kevin's explanation, where it was just the quality of the cards are so much better. Waji finds his second land here and just passes the turn back to Boston. Boston gets a Mishra's Bauble. But as I'm saying is the life totals are still pretty high, and we are kind of deep into this game. At what point are you feeling so far behind? Like Waji just played a second land. What point do you kind of start becoming uncomfortable if you're Waji? Like Boston has a DRC, he has cards in hand, he has lands, and you're if you're in Waji's position, when do you start sweating if you have 4 cards in hand and just one land?
I think he's still okay here because he just has to answer the one DRC. As long like in the Delver Mirror, you kind of want to be the first to establish a more dominant board. And if when you're on the back foot, you obviously you need to answer your opponent's threats, right? So, but Wajih has he did find the red land in a timely fashion. He has 2 red removal spells for this DRC. So I think Wajih is actually not in a bad spot. As soon as he gets this DRC off the board, it's kind of an open game. Let's see what he does with this brainstorm here. So I think so he's hiding information from the bauble. But I think here it would have been good to just bolt the DRC turn to use mana, because he's already quite behind on the mana development, and here he's going to play Murktide. And so I think the reason to play Bolt last turn would have been that you kind of force Boston to think, does he want to burn a counter spell on this? Um, and you got to think that because Boston hasn't done anything for a few turns, that his hand is either a couple counter spells or it's some pieces of interaction. It's just because double and you cantrip and but here, like this runs the risk of playing into double days or force plus days. Whereas last turn, if you cast Unholy Heat or Lightning Bolt on the Dragon's Reach channeler, you're kind of in the same position, except Boston might have used the daze on that Lightning Bolt, and now your Murktide will get to stick for free. If Boston doesn't daze the Lightning Bolt, now you're in the exact same spot where your Murktide will eat 2 counter spells, but there's no Darcy on the battlefield, right? And so
Yeah.
then you're in a situation where you have 3-4 cards in hand and Boston has 1, right? Then you got to feel pretty comfortable when the board's
Hmm.
completely clear.
Yeah. So I think this is a good time where Boston's kind of in the tank on what to do against this Murktide. Oh no, he is just gonna looks like he floats 1 mana and then returns the daze. Triggers the DRC, he reveals a Delver of Secrets.
He's playing around. He's just trying to play around double days, I think. But a very high priority to play around days as much as possible in this matchup if you can afford to, just because that card is just so punishing. And so here,
Hmm.
Wajih will pay. And you got to think this means that Boston has double days because Wajih had the third land.
Yeah. So is there an advantage to just returning both of the lands rather than kind of tapping out to cast a daze?
That's actually a really good question. When this match was going on, I was curious why he didn't hard cast one of the dazes and then just pick up the land for the other days. But I think here this allows him to cast Brainstorm pretty safely without getting dazed. I think in the other route, then if he just casts Brainstorm here and Wajih has daze, he can lose his Brainstorm. And because Boston's hand was just daze, Brainstorm, he's kind of leans this Brainstorm to find him something else. So here he's going to cast the Brainstorm that was sitting in his hand.
Mm-hmm. So he finds an Orcish Bowmasters off the Surveil trigger. He draws it from the Brainstorm, and we're gonna see what two cards he puts back. It looks like it's gonna be Underground Sea and Volcanic Island, and they're the ones he picked up, but he also drew another land. So I think, like what we just discussed, it could have he could have been like one land higher because he let one mana expire, right? So I think
Yeah,
the
that's true.
outcome technically would have been the same. And now, even if we're talking about like the Brainstorm being safely cast, he's no matter what, if his plan was to cast the Brainstorm, he's kind of Brainstorm locked because the only spell in his hand is one more Brainstorm and an Orcish Bowmaster, and the Orcish Bowmaster doesn't trigger Surveil. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. And maybe I'm not used to playing the long game with tempo type strategy, and I don't know. Maybe Boston's a lot more comfortable brainstorm locking himself, but it's not something you regularly want to do.
So I think something that's also become a little different with the new Delvermeres having Orcish Bowmasters is that in the past you would try to hold your brainstorms, maybe to find a fetch land and have the so-called perfect brainstorm, right?
Hmm.
But now with the prevalence of Orcish Bowmasters, I think if your opponent has the ability to cast Bowmasters, it becomes very scary for you to cast Brainstorm because you just don't really want to get into this messy or cagey type of fight where if your opponent wins the fight, you're going to be taking 3 extra damage off your Brainstorm, right?
Yeah.
One of the chance. So you'll see, I think, throughout this match that Boston heavily prioritizes just trying to cast his Brainstorm whenever his opponent is either tapped out or they don't have the mana to cast a Bowmasters. He'll just try to get value off his Brainstorm right away to not take essentially more than 3 extra damage, right? Because the army will also grow.
Hmm. But if he does try to do that, there is he does run the possibility of almost screwing himself over, not being able to shuffle. But I think the payoff the payoff is a lot higher, just not having to face down 3 extra damage and a 4/4 army.
Yeah, that's for sure.
All right, so
And
we
also he gets the
see.
surveil.
Yeah, that's true. So we see Boston wasteland away the black source from Wajih, just trying to keep him off of the ever so important Bowmasters that we've been talking about. Wajih gonna crack his Mishra's Bauble. Boston gonna reveal, but we don't get to see what it is until Wajih passes a turn back. Boston's gonna flash in the Orcish Bowmasters at the end of Wajih's turn. Presumably, just gonna ping Wajih for one.
Just trying to establish a threat here since he is ahead on mana and he just wants to close this game out with the life total lead.
Yeah, and we see Wajih just fire off a lightning bolt. Doesn't want to deal with the Bowmasters. Boston gonna draw for his turn, and Wajih does know about this DRC from the Mishra's Bauble.
Oh yeah, also there was a bobble drop from Wooji. I missed that. Yeah, so
Yeah.
so if there was no removal spell, Boston would have gotten 2 extra points in.
Mm. Okay, so Boston slamming down this DRC that everybody knows about. And I think there's one more brainstorm left in his hand that he's considering casting here. I think just for surveil triggers as well. Unfortunately, we don't get to see what it is, but Wajih holding Spell Pierce, Unholy Heat, Murktide, Flooded Strand in hand. Wajih finally gonna try to fire off the Spell Pierce, and it resolves.
So he actually converted the spell pierce from earlier, and that's actually really because had the didn't have been able to punish this. So Wooji can kind of try to stabilize if he has either a Murktide or something to deal with this DRC, because now he can pay for days.
Mm-hmm. So patience is key. All right, so Wajih cracking the Flooded Strand, going down to 5. going to try to resolve a Murktide region here.
So this should be uncontested. I don't think pre-board there's any one card that can deal. Oh, Brazen Borrower I think would be the only one card that can contest Murktide in this situation.
Yeah, recently I played a Death Shadow list, and it's relatively similar to the Delver suite. And someone asked me when I cast a Petty Theft, they're like, "Whoa, you're still playing that in a Bowmaster meta?" I was like, "It's such a clean mainboard answer to a lot of things that really hurt the tempo type strategies."
Yeah, exactly. Really good answer to Merit Lage too.
Yeah, and especially Chalice. I know Chalice isn't played as much anymore
Oh yeah.
nowadays, but man, does Chalice on one really hurt these types of decks? So Wajih successfully lands a 5/5 Murktide Regent. A key thing that we're gonna see throughout this matchup are Wajih and Boston throwing out Murktide Regents that aren't fully stacked. And I know like a lot of people in local like during local tournaments, like weeklies and stuff, or like kind of lower committal events, they kind of want to go for the maximum Murktide. Do you have any advice, or do you want to shed any light on when you would be going for kind of smaller Murktide regions?
I think you usually go for smaller Murktide regions for two main reasons, to my knowledge. The first one is that if it will help you preserve Delirium for a DRC that you have in play or that you might draw in the future, that's one of the reasons. But I think the key reason is that Murktide actually has a triggered ability on it where you essentially get the Delve effect when you cast another Murktide. So it has the second text, whenever an instant sorcery leaves your graveyard, you can also put 1/1 counters on Murktides that are already in play. So when you play first Murktide, if it's small, you can grow it with a second Murktide that you play if you exile instants and sorceries. So
Yeah,
that's one of the main
I'm
reasons.
gonna cut in really quickly. We're seeing Boston Ponder here. I think he stacked it Lightning Bolt, Daze, Bowmaster, and we see Wajih have 4 health. So I think he stacked it incorrectly. I think Bowmaster should have been on the top so that he can ping 1 at the end of the turn here. But now we see Wajih answering the Underground Sea with a Wasteland.
So this is a really this is a really key turn. So I think Boston he's kind of in his head a little bit with the heuristics thing in the mirror where you're really trying your hardest to play around days at every possible turn. But I think he just didn't take into account Wasteland here because Wajih has not played a Wasteland yet this game, but he's already played 2 days. So I think statistically speaking, you're supposed to keep the Bowmaster and be able to cast the Bowmaster this turn to play around Wasteland. And if you get days, you get days. It's just an odds game, right? But I think
Yeah.
after the match, after this game, Boston comments that he ordered this wrong as well. And so Wajih kind of gets away with robbery at 1 life here. But yeah, really small sequencing error there.
So
That's just
that's just some evidence or some gameplay action showing how legacy really comes down to a lot of micro decisions and a
Mhm.
lot of like compiling incorrect decision making can really change the outcome of your games. So yeah, there are like the 1 to 2 turn combo decks that if you don't have an answer or something to stop the combos from going off, then you'll lose. But stacked up mistakes also will inevitably end in you losing the game here. So these are the two lists for each of the players. Their decks are almost exactly the same. The only change is that Wajih is playing 4 Volcanic Islands to Boston's 3, and Boston's playing 4 Bowmasters to Wajih's 3. So you got a glimpse of these sideboard choices, but I think because it's the mirror match, they're probably relatively going to be boarding the same cards. Do you want to kind of talk about like I know we're not at sideboard cards yet, but are there like cards that are going to be on each of the players' minds for the future games?
yeah. So I think Delver sideboarding for the mirror is more or less what people would consider solved at this point. The cards that are bad are, like I mentioned before, Force of Will, trading 2 cards for 1 in such an attrition-y fair matchup is really not something that you want to be doing. So I think both players will be looking to cut Force of Will out of their deck instantly. And then a lot of the cards in your sideboard are built with this matchup in mind. So cards like Blast, these are really clean answers to resolve Murktide, because in game one, outside of Force, you just don't really have good answers to that card, so it can take over. Pyroblast and Reb, pretty much the same effect in this matchup. That'll solve a lot of that issue. And also Counterbalance, I think, is frequently intended for this matchup because there's so many 1-mana spells. If you land a Counterbalance, it can become very difficult for your opponent um, to be able to resolve spells successfully. So I think those are the cards to look out for.
Okay, cool. So we're gonna see Boston's hand on the big screen here, and then Waji's hand is in the small screen. So Boston looking at double Force of Wills here. Looks like they're both keeping their sevens. Boston's gonna open up with a Mishra's Bauble. Is there any reason? Would it be wrong to kind of keep Mishra's Bauble and wait to at least 1 or 2 turns to see if you ever get a DRC, or do you want to just see what's going on? You want to see that you want to check the top of your opponent's deck and kind of just get the card draw and get the extra card type in the graveyard?
I think it depends on the texture of your hand, but here I think Boston kept a one-lander, so he's just trying to crack the bauble ASAP to get the to try and find second land quickly. And I think Wajih kind of sniffs that out, because typically in the mirror you want to bauble yourself. If you have a regular land and a fetch land, then the bauble can help you determine, do you want to shuffle or do you just want to draw the card that's on top of your deck. So when Boston goes to bauble Wajih here, I think Wajih is thinking, yeah, Boston might be land light, and he did have just one lander.
And that's why Waji goes for the Wasteland on that on his turn.
Right, exactly.
Mm. So we see the aforementioned Dragon's Rage Chandler come down here just maybe 1 turn too late, but I think it's fine no matter what. Boston still has a lot of interaction spells. He's got his Unholy Heat, and he has his Force of Will, and then I think he also has a Daze in his hand, and then just a Cantrip and Ponder. Waji's just gonna fire off the Unholy Heat here, get rid of the Dragon's Rage Chandler.
Yeah, and I don't think you ever daze here. So I think Wajih was thinking about whether or not he wanted to play around daze, but I think that with this situation, I think if Boston dazes here, it's not really the priority target. You know, these 1-mana threats and these 1-mana removal spells, you sort of just trade them as a way of establishing pressure on the board, and you don't want to set yourself back the land here because it puts you further away from casting Murktide or Bowmaster successfully.
Mm-hmm.
So Boston doesn't even think, he just lets it go. But that's not really a tell whether he has days or not.
Yeah, so Boston stacks it so he draws a Mishra's Bauble, checks the top of Waji's deck, and probably just gonna pass it back. Nothing really else going on.
Yeah, doesn't cast the Ponder because he likes the top two, so he wants to be able to dig deeper with this Ponder later.
Yeah. So Waji considering playing a second Wasteland, he does, and he's going after the red source. So this is something that's counterintuitive to what we were talking about before, where we kind of talked about the importance of Orcish Bowmasters and how Boston was kind of really going in against the black sources. And we're seeing Waji do the opposite and going after the volcanic islands instead.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure what the reasoning is for between the Volk and the UC here, but maybe it's because he saw the UC was the first land that was played. So it could be that Boston is light on red sources, and being light on red sources in game one in the mirror can make it really hard to get rid of like a Flip Delver or a 3/3 DRC, because then Bowmasters doesn't answer them. But Boston drew out of it, so
Yeah, I assume the primary removal spell is most likely Bolts and Unholy Heat.
yeah, exactly.
All right, so we're gonna see both players play a Delver here. Wow, Waji's got tons of Brainstorms in his hand. Got, I think that's also an Orcish Bowmaster, so he's primed to set up, getting rid of Boston's board while also being able to dig pretty deep.
Yeah, Boston in the tank here, I think, trying to decide if he wants to cast Heat or Ponder. Okay, he decides he doesn't want to crack the fetch land. So I think it's sharp of him to not crack the fetch land here, because he's not really compelled to act. he's the one with, the board state is exactly even. They have the same number of cards in hand. He's the one with 2 lands. Wajih has 1. So this play can kind of protect. He has a daze if Wajih were to play Bowmasters on his Delver, so he can protect against something like Bowmaster plus daze if he just doesn't act here. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, so Wajih flipping his Delver, revealing a Force of Will, and swinging in for 3. So here's the Bowmasters.
Snaps
Boston
the daze.
instantly. So
Very
quick.
fast daze. Yeah. So this is what he was thinking about the last turn and why he ended up not cracking. So now Wajih has to commit the force that he revealed. Boston's not happy about this, but I mean, I think it's a fine trade, right? You're
Yeah, I don't think there's too much. You're getting 2 cards out of Wajih's hand, but you completely lost basically the majority of your board. Not only did you lose your Delver, but he also set himself back on mana. But I think he top decked the Misty Rainforest this turn.
Yeah, that's right.
So he's cracking his fetch land now, and I'm sure. Do we see a Ponder here in the face of the in the face of the Bowmaster?
I think he's gonna have to try to kill the Bowmaster first with the heat that he's been holding on to. So I think the key question this turn is, does he want to cast the heat in end step to be able to give himself access to 2 mana next turn? And I think it's tough, right? Because if you cast the heat right now, you're susceptible to daze, but you're kind of chewing up your. Yeah, so I think because his entire game plan is hinging so heavily on this Ponder due to the other blanks in his hand, he kind of needs this Bowmaster off the board. So I agree with his play. It's you kind of just take your medicine here, I think.
Yeah, so we see he reveals. I think it was an Underground Sea, a Misty Rainforest, and then there was definitely a. I think it was a Spell Pierce. I don't remember what the third card was, but it was definitely like a snap, not helping, gonna shuffle.
Yeah, he has to find an answer to the Delver Secrets at least.
Yeah, so I'm pretty sure there's definitely Delirium on Boston's side, and that Unholy Heat hits for 6 damage. Yeah,
that's right.
There's a Bauble, Brainstorm, Ponder, and then there's any sort of land. So this kind of was speaking to my point where I made in the first game, where when do you start to sweat in a mirror match like this? Like, he's facing down a 3/2 flyer and a 1/1 orc. How do you think that Boston could have waited one more turn from this pawn, like from firing off the Unholy Heat, or did he have to fire it off right then and there because of the Ponder?
I think, yeah, I think Orcish Bowmaster is kind of a must answer. Like you can find your own Bowmasters, but you don't want to be just taking this kind of incidental damage because he didn't have a guarantee that he would be able to find an answer right away. So you could just be taking 3 extra damage, 4 extra damage over the course of several turns. And like you see here, I think Wajih smells blood in the water. He can tell that Boston's hand is kind of just blank, so he fires off Force of Will on this Lightning Bolt, which is not really a priority target. But this is just a good game sense, I think, from Wajih.
I mean, he's playing really strong into what Delver is kind of classically known for, and it's land kind of like a smaller creature that can apply a lot of pressure in terms of like 3 power, and then just protect it and just keep going at the opponent's life total and disrupting as much as possible. So I think he's really leaning into that strength here. We see Boston rip 2 lightning bolts just twice in a row, just trying to solve all of the questions that Wajih's posing in his efficient creatures. But only being able to draw 1 card a turn means you can only answer 1 question per turn.
Yeah, that's right. So Wajih's doing well to prioritize looking for other threats with his brainstorm so that he can keep applying pressure.
Yeah, so
and
Boston
a 3rd lightning bolt.
ripping off a 3rd lightning bolt. He is slowly solving all of the problems, but Wajih cracking a fetch land here, picks off the volcanic island that he knew was on the top.
This board is looking kind of stable now for Boston, but with 2 blanks in hand, it's still. I would be sweating a little bit because your best draw is probably Murktide here, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, we do see that Wajih hasn't played or drawn a single lightning bolt, and Boston is in lightning bolt range. So Orc coming in for 1 damage. There's a Ponder. Wajih sees Wasteland, Murktide Regent, Scalding Tarn. We're seeing a lot of lands from these decks that traditionally just don't play a lot of lands.
Hmm. I think it's because of the four wastelands as well. You can kind of consider wasteland a spell, so
Yeah.
I think I
This
would take
is
Murktide here. Waji's last card, I think, is a land. So I would have taken Murktide to just continue on the pressure concept. Here he
mhm.
decides to take Wasteland, which kind of goes against his earlier read when he cast Force of Will on the Lightning Bolt, because I think his read there is that his opponent is just land flooded. Now
Yeah. So
Boston gets his own Murktide.
yeah, Boston going down to one. I like reasoning here is that one is not different from two at this point in the game.
Right.
If you're slamming a Murktide Regent because the Orc army can't kill. But there's a days Boston cannot pay the one mana because the last land he has is a fetch land. So now we're gonna go into game three. Wajih up 2 games over Boston. Is it gonna be a clean sweep? So I think we're gonna look at the Boston sideboard plan first, just because he's in the losing position, and we're gonna see very quickly what you talked about before, where some number of Pyroblast effects, whether it's Pyroblast or Red Elemental Blast. The two are pretty interchangeable, but no matter what, three are coming in and Force of Wills are coming out. One of the things that we're going to see here is Boston looking like he's just going to cut the Spell Pierce and add the counterbalances in instead. Is there any reason, is there a better cut than the Spell Pierce?
I don't really think so. I'm a little unclear about how good Brazen Borrower is in this matchup because yeah, I think you're mostly casting as an unsummon because obviously the 3/1 side is susceptible to Orcish Bowmasters. Um, and it's also a very expensive threat, right? Paying 3 mana is a bit rough. But Spell Pierce is a little bit narrow, but I feel like you kind of have to keep in Spell Pierce because it's just one of the cleaner answers to counterbalance. But Boston being on the play might you might be incentivized to just leave it out. It's more of an on the draw kind of card where you just don't want to get blown out by turn 2 counterbalance.
Yeah, so we see from both players, they both instantly cut their Force of Wills, and Wajih kind of playing on what you just spoke about on considering cutting the Brazen Borrower here. So
Yeah, since most of the
yep,
sorry.
sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I think most of the cards that you're gonna want a petty theft are just cards that can be answered more cleanly with Pyroblast, and petty theft doesn't actually answer the card, right? It just puts it back in their hand. So it is technically card disadvantage if you consider that the 3/1 side is not super effective in this matchup.
So we're seeing Boston boarded in 5 cards, right? Double counterbalance and then triple blast effect.
Mhm.
Wajih boarding in 6 cards. I think the 2 cards that he had that differ from Boston was a Flusterstorm and what was the Hydroblast?
Yeah, Hydroblast is the last card.
Is Hydroblast pretty good? I guess if you want to counter the other Pyroblast or Reb effects, but
That's the main use. I think Hydroblast it's okay. I would say it's probably slightly above average. Hydroblast used to be really good when expressive iteration was legal. Obviously, that was the main target for Hydroblast. But I think still now Hydroblast as a way to beat Pyroblast on your Murktide region. I think that's still also fine. I'm less sure about Flusterstorm since it is a bit more narrow and it's basically only able to answer only able to answer things on the stack, as opposed to Hydroblast, which can also answer Lightning Bolts, Delver Secrets, or sorry, not Delver Secrets, Dragon's Rage Channeler. So,
mm,
so I think Hydroblast is a little bit more flexible, but
yeah. So I think did we end up seeing Wajih cut the Spell Pierce?
I think what G actually cut 2 dazes. So my view of what G sideboarding was he cut 4 Force of Wills, 2 dazes, and a Brazen Borrower in exchange for 2 Pyroblasts, a Reb, a Flusterstorm, a Hydroblast, and 2 counterbalances. I believe
Mm,
that's how the sideboarding went.
all right. Yeah, I would be shocked if he cut a Spell Pierce and then put the Flusterstorm, where they basically do essentially the same thing.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So we're gonna see their opening hands here before mulligans. Wajih instantly pitching, and it looks like Boston is gonna keep, or he might still be deciding. But we see Mishra's Bauble, Lightning Bolt, Murktide, and 4 lands. Nothing too exciting. Would you keep this hand?
I would keep this hand. Yeah, I like to think of the Delver Mirror as like it's like limited Magic. Imagine you're playing draft or sealed. It's you need all the cards that you can get. If your hand has lands and spells, I think I would just keep. You
Mm,
don't need a fast threat, especially on the draw. You're most often going to be trying to answer your opponent's cards. So yeah, any hand that can play the game, I would keep.
true. Okay, so while we're seeing them resolve this, you kind of mentioned earlier when we were talking about Hydroblast how expressive iteration was kind of the premier target that you would want to counter. Um, is there a difference in terms of play patterns from when EI was legal to now with the Orcish Bowmasters?
Yeah, I would say the play pattern was very different. Now you're kind of going back to the traditional tempo versus tempo routes. So it has a more tempo versus tempo feel. Whereas before, it was kind of a game of who could resolve more EIs, and you have to be very careful about when and where you're casting your EIs, because if your EI gets countered successfully, then I think you're in a really difficult spot, and it's less likely that threats will just single-handedly run away with the game, because if you're just trading one for one and then you cast more EIs, you'll end up pulling ahead, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that gave Delver game against a lot of decks that normally will just also play a fair game and go over top of them. For example, Death and Taxes or Four Color Control. These decks would just answer one for one, and then they have their own card advantage engine. And Delver doesn't really have card advantage; they just have a lot of card selection. But EI and Mystic Sanctuary, putting EI back on top, was you cast 5 or 6 EIs in the course of a game. Four Color Control will probably lose, right?
Yeah, so early on in this game, we saw both players start off with a Mishra's Bauble, both checking their own decks like you discussed earlier. However, Boston deciding to just play out a Volcanic Island and Wajih playing a Polluted Delta, but Wajih also not cracking. But I'm not sure if we know what the card was that he looked at and decided that he wanted to keep.
Yeah, I
So
didn't get a good look at it, but I actually think Wajii on turn one should have played his own threat. This is just a more effective use of mana, especially when you're on the draw. You really want to just be using your mana efficiently. But I think Wajii put a lot of value in that fetch land because he had Brainstorm in his hand. But I would have probably just played the threat out, and especially because he has two threats in hand. He had a Delver and a DRC. I would have led on Delver, and then this turn you can look to go DRC into Lightning Bolt, and if Boston had an answer for your turn one threat, he would probably try to clear the board, and then your Brainstorm in the future can trigger Surveil also. But yeah, you don't want to fall behind.
yeah, we're gonna see Boston fire off a Brainstorm in response to this Unholy Heat. The Surveil trigger is gonna pitch a Mishra's Bauble, and we're gonna see Boston draw a few lands for this Brainstorm. Looks like he's definitely gonna put back an Underground Sea. I didn't get a good look at the other card that he pitched, but I think it might have just been like a Volcanic Island or something. Oh, it was a Scalding Tarn.
A lot of lands for Boston, so he's
Yeah,
under pressure to be the one to put something on the board, and looks like he has a Delver.
yeah. Delver often often touted as the worst card in Delver, but a threat is still a threat.
Yeah, that's right. Well, especially now, it's so susceptible to Bowmasters. I guess you can't really say so susceptible. If you have a one turn window, if it flips, then you're good to go, right?
Yeah, so I think Waji is considering a Wasteland here, from what I can tell. But I think he's gonna offer Dragon's Reach Channeler first or Bolt. Whoa, he's gonna bolt the Is there is there a world where he plays the Dragon's Reach Channeler first and then bolts?
Oh yeah, that's actually what I thought he would do. I think he's really valuing this fetch land, but he has two fetch lands, so I think it didn't like his brainstorm will still be good. So here he's just losing out on the
A
opportunity
Freeze
to get a
Veil.
Surveil.
Yeah.
Yeah, but he also doesn't have Delirium, so it's possible that he's worried about Bowmasters. I think he's going to play the Delver over the DRC here. Well, now that he got Underground Sea, it should be clear. But you want to burn the quote unquote weaker threat first against Bowmasters.
hmm
See if
So,
Boston has.
do you want to just briefly describe? I'm sure it's obvious for most Legacy players, but just it doesn't help to over describe. But why is Delver the weaker threat?
Well, they both turn into 3 power flyers, but DRC can surveil, so it adds a lot of card selection and can smooth out draws. Uh, it does have the downside where it has to attack every turn, but usually I think that's mostly negligible unless you're already in like a hard losing board state. Then Delver's not going to save you anyways. Like
Yeah.
here, I'm actually surprised that Boston burned the lightning bolt end of turn on this Delver. I think that he could have been okay to take a draw step to see if he finds Bowmasters, because then he could save himself this lightning bolt.
I think the thinking might have been because Wajih hasn't deployed a threat in so long. Boston might have thought that he kind of just drew it, and now he's just trying to land something after solving all of the threats that Boston threw out. And I think he just considered Wajih was like trying to take his turn. So I think Boston just tried to clear the threats that, or all the threats that he thinks Wajih has, and I
Mhm.
think that's why he fired off the lightning bolt. But we see Boston drawing a Delver off the top. He has Wasteland, Scalding Tarn, and a Murktide Regent to pair along with it. Boston going after the Volcanic Island instead of the Underground Sea.
Yeah, so post board the dynamic is a little bit different because there's so many blast effects that and those become kind of the deciding factors, I think, in the matchup because your Murktide Regent is much less likely to take over the game. But Wajih, I think, is just still trying to prioritize Underground Sea. Maybe that means that he has another 1 mana threat.
Yeah, I don't know. It feels like they kind of reversed, where Wajih was going for volcanic islands in the earlier games, and Boston was going for underground seas, and now Boston's going for volcanic islands, and Wajih's going for the underground
Yeah,
seas. But
that's a funny dynamic.
I'm actually surprised that Boston went for the volcanic island over the underground sea when he was already going to play the Delver. I would assume that he would try to go for an underground sea in fear of like the Bowmaster, but
Mhm.
he could just be thinking very far ahead. And like something I didn't consider was the importance of the blast effects. So we'll see how much that comes into play.
Yeah, he does have Murktide in his hand right now, so I think that's why he's prioritizing trying to
Ah,
cut off the blasts. And then you also see why Wajih was prioritizing the underground sea because I think his DRC is not yet delirious. It's only land, instant, and creature. Oh no, there's a bauble. Okay, so it is delirious. But
yeah,
Wajih also has like multiple brainstorms in his hand. I think this is the brainstorm that's been in his hand since turn 1. So
yeah.
now he's
So
daring the Bowmaster.
he is. So gonna keep the land on the top instead of surveilling it away. So I think he's valuing it just because it's a fetch land.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to play around days here, perhaps. This is going to be an interesting one. I think I would put DRC and Fetchland on top. Is that what he does?
Looks like that is what he's considering. Oh, he's putting a red blast on the top.
This seems more dangerous to me. I think you have to be very careful of counterbalance here because that's what can blow this game open. But he will draw it.
Yeah, so he draws the polluted delta.
Right, the Reb is on top of his deck right now.
Yeah.
I like keeping DRC as just to match your opponent's threats on the board here. You don't want to fall too far behind.
Yeah, and I think he's gonna do all he can to just not surveil and not shuffle here, just because red, like as you said, the blast effects were just so important.
Yeah, he's gonna try to leave the Reb on top for sure. But I think because I don't think there's really any world where he shuffles this Reb away. I think I would have just kept the Reb on top and left Brainstorm there, because I think the only way you're ever casting Brainstorm is if your opponent has counterbalance. And here it is. Yeah, if your opponent has counterbalance, you have to cast Brainstorm, but you're kind of just burning a Brainstorm here. Um, yeah, I would have tried to keep the Brainstorm in my deck because yeah, in either case he would have had to shuffle to get the second red land, but he has to pick up this Reb now, and now he's a little susceptible to daze because he has to go Brainstorm Reb.
Yeah, so I think one thing that is very so we just talked about Wajih's plays and his decisions here. He's obviously going to keep the Reb on top, but we're going to see the other two cards that he finds. It's a Hydroblast and a Wasteland. So obviously we're just going to keep the Reb and try to, you know, resolve it against this counterbalance to not have it on the board, as it can be
Hmm.
quite devastating. He opts to, well, he doesn't opt to. He has to. He has to find a red source here, so he shuffles away the Wasteland and the Hydroblast. But something I wanted to talk about was Boston's had this Delver on for quite a long time, and it hasn't flipped. And when he surveilled for the counterbalance, he's left it on top. Do we think it is something that flips Delver?
I think it's not only something that flips Delver. I have a sneaking suspicion that it's a 1-drop as well. Because if counterbalance sticks, you really want to be able to counter, like, if your opponent plays a 1-drop on the next turn. And yeah, and I think from Wajih's perspective, you can kind of tell that based on the play patterns that the 2 cards on top of Boston's deck since the Delver came into play was the DRC and then the counterbalance. So he also knows the last card is not Daze.
All right, so Waji's going to slam down a Mishra's Bauble, going to get 2 Surveil triggers, but he's going to keep the first one on the top, which means the second one is also going to stay. Waji's going to
Let's see
check the
what this
top
card
card.
was. It is Pyroblast. I'm pretty sure it was discussed in the commentary or in the audio.
All right, so there's
Yeah,
a Pyroblast.
It is Pyroblast. Yeah.
So we flip the Delver finally, and I assume that this is just going to be left up as a blocker against the Dragon Rage Chandler.
Right, he's behind in the race.
But he does have this Murktide, and Wajih down to 1 card in hand. So a common strategy against the Delver decks, whether it's the mirror or not, is usually the most common way to victory is just running out the Delver player, just running them out of resources. And now that we see Wajih going from like he had like 3 or 4 cards in hand, now he's down to 1. I feel like Boston's kind of in like a lead position, even though he's 4 points of life down.
Yeah, I agree. I think the likelihood of this Murktide sticking is quite high. Here, my thought is that he's trying to consider what happens if Wajih left Pyroblast on top, which I do think is one of the better cards to leave on top here from the Surveil. But also, because Boston's not playing Hydroblast himself, he doesn't really have an answer to opposing Pyroblast. You kind of just have to brute force it. So it makes sense here to just slam Murktide. There's a lot of upside. If Wajih doesn't have Pyroblast here, one of the DRCs will have to suicide, since that is one of the requirements on the passive.
All right, so are we going to see a maximum Murktide here? That's the question. Probably not, right? Because he has a DRC on the board.
I think he still is able to, because there's a counterbalance and a Mishra's Bauble, so he has 2 fairly rare types. Oh no, he keeps it small. Okay.
So it's just, I think it's a 4/4.
Yeah. Oh, it is maximum though. It's a 5/5. It's a 3/3 base.
It's a 3/3 base. Okay.
You would want to make it as big as possible here because you want to dodge Unholy Heat. Or no, the heat's been played. Never mind.
I mean, he could still want to, if he's going to use it as a blocker, which I assume that he's going to, because it's not forced to attack. I would assume that you would want to max it out just in case he has a lightning bolt right off the top here. If he swings, he doesn't want to die, no?
Yeah, that's fair.
I don't know.
I'm actually curious. I'm curious about the bolt on the Delver on the previous turn, because this attack is forced. So I think because Boston didn't attack, that's kind of indicating that he wants to block with the Delver secrets. And if you had saved bolt, you could have traded off the entire board here, right? Like both DRCs would have gotten blocked. The Delver trades off, and you bolt the Murktide. So now you're just facing down one single DRC. That might be slightly better.
Yeah, so we see Wajih draw Murktide Regent for the turn, and the card in his hand was a Daze. So I think he can try to brute force his own Murktide Regent onto the board. Or does Boston have an answer?
No, Boston revealed Pyroblast a few turns ago.
Yes.
Yeah. So this is known. I think here Wajih could have slammed the Murktide pre-combat to try and cut off Delirium. It could give him another look, but he's in a really bad spot here. He's facing down 2 flyers. He knows his Murktide's not resolving. The Daze is kind of rotting in his hand, so
yeah. So what is it? Obviously, Daze stronger the earlier in the game it is, just because of the severe lack of resources at the beginning of the game. But Daze, you said earlier, was just an incredibly important card in this matchup, and we see just the longer the game goes, the worse it becomes.
Yeah, it does wear off, but I think that the power of the 2 mana cards in this matchup are just so scary that you kind of have you kind of keep it in at least like when I play the Delver Mirror, I keep in Dazes and I don't feel very good about it, but it's I also don't feel good when my opponent puts counterbalance on the stack. That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, so we're seeing Boston consider bringing the Spell Pierce back in.
Right, yeah, because now he's on the draws, and now he would really like an answer to this counterbalance on turn two.
Yeah, so this is probably a common strategy is when you're on the draw and you don't have as many land resources as your opponent, cutting the days is not a terrible idea. Like Wajih did it. I'm surprised Wajih cut 2 dazes in this game because he was on the play.
No, he was on the draw because he
Oh
lost.
yes, yes,
Oh, he
you're
won
right,
the
you're
first
right.
two games.
He won the worst first two, so dazes get severely worse if you're on the draw and behind on lands.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah. Well, Boston considering not cutting the days. I think he's just flipping back and forth.
Yeah, he really values days in this matchup, whether regardless of play draw, which makes sense because of just how taxing Garkish Bowmasters can be. It can completely turn off all of your cantrips. He's still waffling. It is
Yeah.
important to note that days can stop Bowmasters, but Spell Pierce cannot. That's
This
probably what
is
he's,
yeah.
and it comes
So it
back
looks like
out.
he is keeping the days over the spell pierce.
I think he knows that Wajih is also playing one more Bowmasters than him, so Wajih's or wait, no, Wajih's playing less. Never mind. Sorry.
Yeah, so Waji playing the extra land instead of the extra bowmaster. All right, so while they're prepping here, we've kind of been through, 3 games already. What at this point at this point, we're in like post-sported games. What are going to be the key factors in determining like who the winner is going to be, especially like taking into account that this is a best of 5 match?
I really think it's going to come down to who can make the most out of their cantrips and their card selection and really try and min max a lot of these small edges because it's so attrition-y and you're very likely to just trade one for one. One draw step can be the difference, right? Like in the previous game, if Wajih's draw step was Pyroblast, then that game is still anybody's game, right? Um, yeah, I think that's going to be one of the key factors. And another key factor is kind of just looking out for what goes on with the, so to speak, key cards in this matchup. The cards like Pyroblast, cards like Orcish Bowmasters and Counterbalance. These are the heavy hitters that will really demand a lot of attention.
Yeah. Okay. So we're gearing up for game 4. We're going to see Waji on the play and we're going to take Waji's hand cam as the perspective. So Boston's going to be in the bottom left-hand corner here. So we see the Brazen Borrower and Spell Pierce in Waji's hand, 2 contentious cards that we were talking about earlier that he's decided to leave in or at least bring back in this 4th game. Boston starting off with a Mishra's Bauble targeting himself. Looks like he has a Polluted Delta and Underground Sea at least in his hand, so which one is he going to start with? He could also begin with a Wasteland as well if he opts to keep it. Looks like he's going to, but he doesn't Wasteland.
Yeah, he wants to see if Wajih will use this mana first. I'm guessing that if Wajih had not cast Brainstorm here, then Boston would have tried to go for the upkeep Wasteland. Just to delay your decisions to the latest time that they have to be made.
So we're seeing these 2 cards just kind of coming in and out of existence here with a Spell Pierce and the Brazen Borrower. I guess Waji thinking like just good to keep it just in case.
Mm-hmm.
All right,
He's
so
gonna fire off this one.
yeah, Waji gonna fire off a Ponder. There's Wasteland, Scalding Tarn, Spell Pierce. Looks like we're just not valuing the Spell Pierce.
I think I would shuffle this Ponder. You don't really have any answers or threats. Your hand is a little bit wheel spinny. Like you're spinning your wheels for quite a bit with this hand, and you have the land that you need. So like now you're drawing 2 lands and a Spell Pierce that may not really be impactful.
Yeah,
I
he
I would go
obviously
for threat.
doesn't really want it that much.
Mhm.
But I mean, he could be opting for the Wasteland because Boston's opted to go for the Wasteland route, so he might just try to strip Boston of resources.
But I think he had information on the first turn because Boston bobbled himself, right? So I think that usually tells you that your opponent has, a regular land,
Hmm.
either an underground sea or a volcanic island, and they have a fetch land, right? Otherwise, they would just bobble you.
Yeah,
Um, so yeah, Boston is showing that he had the underground sea and he had a polluted delta. So I think Wasteland is not really. I don't think it's going to do what you want it to do this game, which is to deny your opponent the ability to cast spells.
yeah. So we're gonna see Wajih commit to the line that I was thinking of, and just playing into Boston being able to just continue doing what he wants to do. He's gonna reveal for the Brainstorm. He's gonna draw two Delvers and an Unholy Heat. We see that Boston already has most of the mana that he really wants, two Underground Seas and a fetch land, so he can get a red source when he really needs it. But the biggest thing is that he can deploy threats, and Waji's still kind of just sitting around doing the same thing that he's been doing the last couple of turns.
Yeah, Boss's hand is really well set up now. I think his hand is he's not even really brainstorm luck. Like every card here is a card that he wants. And he left the brainstorm on top to be able to flip his Delver too. Good foresight.
Yeah, and because he's drawing like his threats, Waji's kind of digging for answers to try and solve it because he doesn't have threats of his own.
That's right.
And he's kind of just trading resources into blanks when Boston can just continue producing things that Waji just needs to continuously answer.
So you asked earlier when I would start to feel uncomfortable in the Delver mirror. Looking at Wajih's hand, I would start to feel uncomfortable right now. I mean, casting days on a Delver is really, I think you're really, especially being on the draw, you're already down a land, and then dazing a Delver. There's so many answers to Delver secrets. It's the worst threat. You really do not want to be spending.
Like, did he? I don't think he actually needed to daze at this point, though. They're both at 20 life. I think he has a
Mhm.
bit of time to at least find something.
Yeah, I think that's also true. But his at the top of his deck is really that like that brainstorm is locking him out for a bit. I think this is yeah. I don't want to be Mr. Hindsight, but I think this is kind of going back to Ponder previously, where if he shuffled, he would have a lot more looks, and it would help
Hmm.
this brainstorm as well. But
I mean,
here
it
we
does
are.
go back to what we were saying much earlier, where like a deciding factor of all of like a lot of legacy games is the huge amount of stack of kind of minor mistakes that just compile to determine the outcome very early.
Hmm.
So this just might be evidence of it happening. Boston just has everything that he wants, right? He has a threat, he has a bowmasters, he has interaction in terms of the red elemental blast and the unholy heat, and he can also dig and not brainstorm lock himself with the fetch and the brainstorm.
His
So
hand is
this
really good
is
right now.
this is
Yeah.
kind of like one of the perfect hands that like a Delver player wants to be seeing, no?
Yeah, it's basically perfect. Yeah. You're insulated against any dangerous thing that your opponent can do, while you also have like here I think he's thinking about whether he wants to play the underground sea or the fetch land. It might be a bit better to play the fetch land because he's going to be playing Delver this turn, and it can give him some like if the top card of his library is not something good, then he can shuffle it. But I think his hand is so good that like he will take anything, even like a land would be good. It will insulate him against Pierce and Daze. Any threat, any one mana spell obviously is great. And I guess like not playing the fetch land protects it, delays needing to get this volcanic island, and he really wants to protect this volcanic island because Wajih has shown that he's pretty willing to just fire off these wastelands aggressively, and Boston heavily valuing the blast in his hand is just trying to protect the Volk as long as he can.
Yeah, so we're gonna see Boston not flip a Delver. He's gonna draw the Murktide region on top instead. I was gonna ask earlier, but we kind of breezed through it. But at this point in time, Boston didn't know what was on the top, right?
Mhm. Yeah, he did
Right.
not. It was a Murktide region though, I think.
Yeah. So Waji drawing a red elemental blast for his turn, looking at two Scalding Tarns, gonna play a volcanic island for the turn. Doesn't really have great answers at this point, even though he's just looking at a one like a 1/1 Delver.
I think this is going to be a turn where he's looking to cast Murktide Regent because he has the mana to pay for days, and he also has. I think he had the Hydroblast from an earlier cantrip, and he's going to be able to fight through Power Blast here. So let's see what happens. And he does have two Murktides, so
Yeah.
um,
So he's actually. Would you be exiling your spells here, or would you be exiling your lands? I think
I think
because you have the second Murktide, would you not want to make the first one smaller?
yeah, I think I would make this first one a little bit smaller too. I think I would make it a 4/4. Um, does Boston have Delirium? Boston does have Delirium. Creature, land, instant, artifact. Yeah, Boston does have Delirium. You can't make this if you can make this a 7/7 to dodge heat, then that's good. So he did make it a 7/7. So yeah, like it's sort of a toss up which way you want to go. But I think he really thinks that this Murktide is gonna stick because of the Hydroblast. Here, Boston's in the tank. I think almost always the Murktide's going to resolve because you can always just heat it, or you can always blast it while it's in play. But he's just trying to decide whether he wants to use this cantrip or what he wants to do with his mana this turn.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that he's Waji has cast the Murktide as coming in as a 7/7. So even though like he has two ways of dealing with this or Boston has two ways of dealing with this Murktide, right? He can try to counter it on the stack with the Pyroblast. He could try to remove it with the Pyroblast, or he could use a combination of Unholy Heat and this Orcish Bowmasters. What would be like your thinking on? Is there like a best route that would that Boston would be considering here?
I think the Bowmaster and Heat route, if you can succeed it, is probably the best solve because it gets good use out of your it gets good use out of your Orcish Masters, and it gets good use out of your Unholy Heat, which is it's a 1 of in your deck, and it's primarily to solve this 6/6 Murktide question. So when your opponent plays a 7/7 and you have this combo, it's quite good. But I think he's just thinking about whether or not he should be trying to play around days. But his hand has so much action in it. He really wants to spend his mana, and in this way, even if this doesn't work out, he has the backup plan of Reb. So I feel like it's pretty safe to go for this. But this was still quite a good find from him to be able to get max value out of both of these cards here. Like the Bowmaster's got to ping a creature, and the Heat gets to go to its primary target. So he's really happy.
Yeah, so that is the play that he ended up going with is casting the Orcish Bowmasters to deal 1 damage to the Murktide region, and then trying to finish it off using his Polluted Delta, fetching for a volcanic island, and then casting an Unholy Heat for 7 damage or 6 damage. And Waji is now going to respond to the Unholy Heat with his Spell Pierce that he's been whiffling in and out.
Hmm. Yeah, get that Spell Pierce out of the hand because I think it's
Yeah,
expire date is coming up.
it's definitely doing its job, and it's done its job. So now I can kind of check out of here.
Also worth noting, Boston, very good sequencing there, playing the Bowmaster first so that you don't get dazed. Because if you heat first and then you cast the Bowmaster, your opponent dazes. If your opponent counters one of your spells, you want the body in play, right?
Yeah, oh, especially if it's two bodies.
Oh, it's two bodies. Yeah, exactly. Two bodies in play.
Yeah, so Boston's just gonna fire off a red elemental blast. Waji tapped out, so he can't use the hydro blast that's in his hand to stop the red elemental blast. Now Boston's swinging in for 3. Delver's still not flipping. Very, very combative here. We're just gonna see if Boston's gonna try and just set up a Delver flip here with a brainstorm.
Oh, he has the Power Blast. Okay, so he can flip.
The question is, yeah, so that's what he's gonna do. It looks like I guess the land for turn could just be stripping Waji away from casting a Bowmaster. So if you can go Wasteland on the Underground Sea, it stops
This
him
is
from killing
super
any of his
good.
creatures.
Yeah, this is so good for Boston. Like he gets to cast a Brainstorm while his opponent's tapped out, so no risk of Bowmaster, and he gets to flip his Delver. So this is optimal use of the cantrip.
Yeah, so I think we can say that Boston's playing like a possessed man. He's got a
Yeah,
demon in him.
yeah, he's playing quite well, I'd say. This
There's
is a
a
3/3.
Dragon's
It
Rage
is.
Chandler. It is a 3/3. There's a the Murktide and the Mishra's Bauble in there.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so Waji losing the race here. Does he block the the insectile aberration, the Delver with the Dragon's Rage Channeler?
I'm actually not sure. I think it depends on the attack. So here Boston is kind of tempting him. It's hard to block the army here because you just get destroyed by another Bowmaster. But I think if your opponent has second Bowmaster, you're in a hard way anyhow. But probably blocking with no answer to the Delver, probably preserving your life total is fine. Yeah, then he can try. Yeah, what you can try and leverage this Brazen Bar and by bouncing the army. Um, I wonder if there's a world where you just block the army and oh no, he can't cast Brazen Bar this turn. Yeah, then I think you're supposed to just block the aberration to stem the bleeding because you're sort of priced into casting the Murktide next turn to try and do something on the board.
Yeah. So one thing I'm curious about is, do you save, like, if Boston tries to go for a Murktide Regent, as you know, there's no evidence that there's none in his graveyard, so Boston still has all of the Murktides in his deck. Does Wajih save the red elemental blast to try to fight Boston's Murktide, or does he save it to try to protect landing his own?
I think it's very hard to protect your own Murktide with Reb because the best answer because he also saw the Pyroblast, right? So he knows that he needs Hydroblast to be able to protect his Murktide. So I think
Mhm.
this Reb is like you're kind of priced into holding it here. The only targets you're going to ever cast this Reb on are Counterbalance and Murktide Reach. I think everything else you kind of just have to let it go. And Boston did
Mm.
have second Bowmaster, so heads up to not block the army, but definitely in a tough spot now with 4 power on board across 3 different bodies.
Yeah, and Wajih not finding another land here for quite some time. The petty theft kind of rotting away because it does commit 2 mana to kind of dealing with this orc army that's kind of slowly growing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what you really needs is third land so that he can go Murktide with Hydroblast back up, since the Power Blast is face up.
Yeah, so we're gonna see Boston cast his Murktide here. Looks like he's not gonna go for maximum as there's an Underground Sea in his exiled pile, so it's gonna be a 7/7 most likely.
I think he's actually considering whether or not he wants to max him because the cards in his graveyard are just lands, Delvers, and Bauble. So I think he is actually thinking about leaving a spell. Yeah, he leaves the Brainstorm.
Yeah, I think the math doesn't really change, right? Like the bigger
Mm-hmm.
it is, like at a certain point, I think it's like at 5, the math doesn't really change because you have so much power on board that the difference
Right.
between a 5/5 and a 6/6 isn't too much of a difference.
Yeah, also because it's easier to answer Murktide with Blast Post sideboard, you kind of want to like give yourself a chance to have a second big Murktide,
Yeah,
and
so we're
Wedgie's
gonna
gonna fire back
see.
with
Yeah,
Reb.
we're gonna see a 6/6 Murktide, and then Waji's just gonna counter it.
The 6/6
I
makes
pre-
sense. It presents lethal, right?
yeah, I
The
presume
left
that
side makes 5/5.
I presume that Waji's just gonna counter it and not try to target it while after it's been resolved.
Yeah,
I don't think there's any reason why you would want to let the Murktide resolve and then try to kill it with
I
the
think
Pyroblast effects.
I think it's a fairly minor difference. There's like maybe some world where you're thinking about playing around Flusterstorm, so you can like take an untap and then Pyroblast. That comes up. So I think players just get used to killing Murktide on the stack since there's not really like a protection spell or anything like that.
Yeah.
If you're
So
gonna
Waji finally gonna just petty theft the Orc army. It was my mistake. The both players were supposed to have like open deck lists, but I forgot to bring them. So they're just playing blind here to their side to each other's sideboards.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yeah. I don't know. I thought it would have made for like a little bit more interesting play if each player knew the exact 75,
Mhm.
but I just made the mistake of forgetting all the deck lists.
A
All
good
right,
days here to
so
protect the pressure, keep
yeah.
keep the life totals going, and
Whoa, we
now
finally
Wedgie finds
find
the land.
find the third land.
We have Murktide Pyroblast now, or Hydroblast now. So this game is interesting. It's Boston needs to rip. I don't remember the other cards in his hand. She
Yeah,
makes
and
I think
I don't think there's enough time for Boston to just swing out with everything and slowly whittle him away. Like he'll only get 2 points of damage in if he swings with
yeah
everything.
he's gonna need something else here. But yeah, you
Oh,
see Boston
Boston.
takes the untap.
Yeah,
Yeah, it has another
untaps.
mark.
Yeah, he draws into the Murktide, which is quite timely.
Yeah, so here he untaps because I think he knows that Wajih plays Flusterstorm. So if you try to cast Power Blast and Step there, you could just get completely blown out by Fluster. Whereas here you'd be able to pay.
Yeah, that is true. These two do play against each other quite a bit. I think they both play at face to face very often.
Yeah, that's right.
Whether or not they actually play against each other in their 4 round weeklies is a different story, though.
So here I think he's thinking about what he wants to do because he's able to cast both Pyroblast and Murktide, but considering days maybe. So here's some. He might be reviewing the past. Magic is like poker in some ways. You have to like review previous turns and previous plays and think about like, oh, what do my opponent's actions mean? What can they tell me about their hand? Honestly, I can't remember if there was any tell that there was a days, but okay,
Yeah,
here's the Hydro.
I think that's why we're sitting here commentating post
Yeah,
event.
exactly.
We're not sitting down there.
But again, Boston valuing respecting the power of days, I should say, not playing the Murktide here.
Yeah,
Which
so
he
he just throws
can't
his
really attack.
pyroblast, and then it gets hydroblast.
Yeah. Oh, he draws
Wow,
third Merc.
that is a lot of Murktide regions from Boston. So he set up pretty well here, right? Is Boston in an attacking position for this turn?
I don't think he can attack yet because he can't get through the Murktide, but he's gonna pass. So he makes a 4/4, which to me is a tell that he has another Murktide. I mean, we did see his hand cam, but I think in all cases you would just make a 6/6 here because it would just be bigger than your opponent's 5/5.
Yeah,
Uh,
so like from Wajih's perspective, it's like why would Boston exile like 2 lands rather than 2 spells?
yeah, but it doesn't matter because next turn he's just gonna be able to make this thing a 6/6 anyways, and then this is forcing Wajih to have double Pyroblast now.
Yeah. So
Very
whoa,
careful play from
did
Boston.
I miss something? Why did the Orc army jump up to a 4?
So the bobble, yeah, Wajih cracked the bobble last turn, and he's drawing now. So there's 2 triggers off the 2 Bowmasters, and Boston makes a really astute 1/1 split here because that marks so the Murktide is now 5/5 with 1 marked on it, so he can attack safely with his token. And if
Mm.
Wajih has Pyroblast plus block, the Murktide will trade off, and then the other Murktide will just win the game. So Boston, I think, is just locked here. This is really safe. Yeah, he can
Yeah,
attack with
so
everything.
coming in with the team after casting his third Murktide Regent and Wajih packing it up, we're going to a game 5.
Pretty exciting. This is a
I think this is
big
probably
turnaround
like
from 2 games.
I know everyone is like, ooh, Delver, it's so boring. But honestly, it's probably like the most fun magic to like just watch because it really does come down to how each of the players can leverage like the card advantage and the micro decisions, right? Like we saw,
Right.
like again going back to the first ponder that Wajih cast that game, it
Mhm.
he really felt the repercussions like for what 3 or 4 turns.
Yeah. Yeah, he fell behind, I think, after that ponder for sure. There were a lot of cards in his hand where you really don't want to corner yourself into situations where you have to find ways to make your cards be max effective. You just want your cards to always be as flexible as possible, and you don't want you don't want to get shoved into a tight spot because then you're kind of at the whim of what you draw and like what your opponent's doing, right? You want to
Mhm.
be able to remain flexible and have options. And I
Yeah, so that's just a note for all you newer legacy players and a note for myself as well is sometimes going for the maximum isn't isn't the right thing to do.
yeah, you just want to get val. Sometimes you just have, especially in this matchup. Sometimes you just need to spend your mana. Sometimes you just need to get your brainstorms under their bowmasters. But other times, you have to max juice your petty thefts or your spell pierces because the spots that they can be good are just they're very tight spots.
Yeah, so we're going to go into the game 5 here. Um Wajih on the play. So we're gonna start game 5 here. We're gonna check out Boston's hand, kind of get a
Super.
glimpse of it here. So there's a Daze Ponder Unholy Heat with a bunch of fetches and a Wasteland.
Pretty good hand, I'd say. Yeah, he can answer an early threat. He can beat counterbalance on 2, and he has Ponder to dig for more things. And he has lands, which are really important in this matchup. You do not want to get stuck on lands.
Yeah, I didn't. I think we saw that they're playing like pretty stock list, right? And a lot of stock lists lean to because they're on Grixis now. They are not playing any basics. Where traditionally Delver used to play like an island just in case because Wasteland is a very prevalent card. It is very common,
Mhm.
and Delver is already a relatively land light deck. As you mentioned before, Wasteland kind of considered as a spell rather than a land.
Right.
Uh, but yeah, we're gonna see Wajih mulligan to 6. Uh, Looking at a one lander here. I don't think he wants to go lower than 6. He does have a couple threats and the days, and he also has the Mishra's Bauble to kind of help with his surveil triggers. But he's gonna look to bottom the Bowmasters here. Do you value Bowmasters over Counterbalance or Counterbalance over Bowmaster?
I think counterbalance, if it stays in play, can just single-handedly take over the game. So I agree with Wajih's bottom here. I also think Bowmasters was probably the weakest card in his hand. Here there's an argument to holding the bauble for turn 2, but without land 2, I think I would just try to find the second land off the surveil ASAP. Because if you can slam counterbalance and your opponent doesn't have an answer, you're really far ahead.
Yeah, so we're gonna see. I'm not sure if we get a capture of what Wajih sees. Doesn't look like we do. So we don't know what he's looking at for the surveil. It is a
Oh,
lightning bolt,
that's
so
lightning
he
bolt.
he he pitches it immediately. Gonna crack target Boston.
Yeah, he just wants to draw this land quickly. So here he has 2 looks for it for his main phase.
Yeah, so Wajih knows that Boston has a brainstorm. Boston just gonna crack a Misty Rainforest, get a volcanic island, try to unholy heat this Dragon's
Oh.
Rage channeler, and Wajih decides to daze the unholy heat.
This is really aggressive, but I think maybe his thought process is that he can kind of cheat on this land drop. But it's not really cheating on the land drop because you're only making 1 mana anyway, since you're not dazing on your turn. Um, but like he thinks that there's a good chance he's gonna miss this land drop anyways.
Yeah, I don't know, like the DRC. Maybe he's valuing the double surveil trigger because like the DRC wasn't even a 3/3, and I think I agree with you that the daze was very aggressive.
Especially because he's kind of leaning on counterbalance with this hand. This is just setting him back another turn, but
Yeah, so
it
Boston
is.
gonna fire off the brainstorm that Wajih knows about. Draws a Scalding Tarn Lightning Bolt into Volcanic Island. So Boston's still looking at a lot of lands, but does have a lot of interaction.
Yeah, he has a lot of good tools here. So he
And he
has the.
still has the Ponder.
Mhm.
That's good.
Here he's probably just looking. Yeah, so he gets a perfect brainstorm here. 2 lands go away. He's probably just going to bolt one of these DRCs to stem the bleeding a little bit. So noteworthy that he didn't wasteland because he's facing two two big dudes already, or they may be big
Mm.
dudes.
Yeah, I was about to mention that was he dazed, returned the volcanic island, and then Boston re- kind of put back a wasteland rather than taking the volcanic island away. So, we see why. There we go. Wajih trying to resolve a counterbalance here, and Boston does have the daze, right?
Yeah, I think he had it in his opening hand. So here we see. Yeah, this is why Daze is still good on the draw. You do not want to let counterbalance come into play. That card is incredibly hard to beat, I think.
So we're gonna see Boston fire off a Mishra's Bauble and then target himself. He's gonna shuffle it away.
I would be nervous in Wajih's spot here. Your opponent has a lot of cards in hand. You have 2. You don't really have a follow-up threat after that counterbalance, so
Yeah, and if Boston, like with the ton of cards that he, or not the ton, but with a bunch of cards in his hand, he most likely has an answer for this DRC. So we're gonna ponder here. Sees Murktide, Brainstorm, Delver.
Pretty good.
So
3 cards.
yeah, pretty good, but still doesn't it doesn't like solve the Dragon's Rage Channeler. But I don't think he really needs to at this point.
Yeah, he's just gonna run out his own Delver for now.
Gonna Wajih gonna swing at Boston, dropping him down to 10, passing the turn. Very low on resources. Boston flipping the Delver. Wajih only has 3 cards in hand, right?
Yeah, 3 cards in hand.
All
I
right,
think it's
so
Cantrip and some unknown cards that he's since drawn.
yeah, and then Boston. I think Boston's in the tank at the moment, going for a
Yeah,
Brainstorm.
yeah, I don't think you fire off the Murktide yet. It's not quite time because your opponent hasn't shown any blasts, and he finds Lightning Bolt, so now he's in a really comfortable spot. And when you get to these spots where you don't have to act because your opponent's board is clear and you have the advantage, then you're really comfortable.
Yeah, so I think Boston's drew Polluted Delta, Murktide, Lightning Bolt off of the Brainstorm, and he put back Volcanic Island, and then I think it was the Polluted Delta as well.
And then another perfect brainstorm. So Boston just pulling really ahead. His hand is stacked, and he's
Yeah.
ahead on the board.
A part of me really wants to put like one of those advantage bars from
Yeah,
chess, but I'm not smart enough to calculate that, so we'll leave that until I get a professional editor.
fair enough. Again, worth pointing out, good sequencing from Boston. He bolts first before attacking because I think if there was a Hydro Blast from Wajih, then he would want to hold up the Delver as a blocker. Since you want to trade when you're ahead on cards in hand, you want to keep the board clear. And Wajih's
Yeah.
being the counterbalance that Boston is
Yeah,
about to draw.
so Wajih used the Mishra's Bauble to just draw an extra card, and then targeted Boston. Boston revealed a counterbalance off the top.
Pretty scary moment, yeah. Wajih really needs this Underground Sea because I think he has 2 Bowmasters in hand now.
Yeah. Boston going for the counterbalance. He knows that he's up on resources. Wajih hasn't played a lands in forever. And it looks like Wajih has said that it's resolved. And Wajih gonna petty theft it.
He needs some time
Here's
here. Trigger counterbalance. Oh my god.
wow, Boston revealing the days off the counterbalance to just counter the petty theft that's trying to answer it.
Yeah, it's pretty disgusting. This game is
Yeah.
very likely to just be over now. Yeah, like Boston's hand is so stocked, like it's so stacked. He didn't even think about casting the counterbalance because even if counterbalance got countered, he still has a follow-up Murktide, so he's just feigning threat after threat, which he's really falling behind here, especially with double Bowmasters that can't be cast.
Yeah, now we're gonna see a maximum here. The Murktide coming in as an 8/8. Boston has nothing but interaction and a brainstorm.
Yeah, you can put Pyroblast back on top to counter a blast as well. Here we go.
Here we go. There's a
Oh, Wajif does
daze.
fight back. Okay, so it's a 0, so neither of these spells will get countered. That means the Murktide is off the table. Okay, which he's buying a lot of time here. Well, if he had another blast and he could get rid of the counterbalance too, he'd be in a great spot. But this is already pretty good.
All right, so
Dang.
Boston drawing for turn. It is the polluted delta that was revealed off of the counterbalance. Boston swinging in, bringing Wajih down from 10 to 7. Wajih gonna tap for his own Delver, trigger the counterbalance. It is a Mishra's Bauble, not gonna counter the Delver.
I think you're okay leaving Bobble on top since Bobble will let you know if counterbalance will counter the next thing.
Yeah, and then you can act accordingly then.
Yeah, especially with this fetch land. So now he's probably just gonna leave this in play. Since he has the tool, since he is ahead, like Wajih is gonna have to block even if the Delver flips, and then he has a Pyroblast to deal with it even if it were a blocker.
All right, so we're looking like it's going to be the end state of the game here. Wajih had 3 Orcish Bowmasters. Finally finds a way to get his black source.
Yeah, it's gonna put him to 3 though, which is really not a spot you want to be in here.
Yeah, especially because the Orcish Bowmasters cannot block the Insectile Aberration, nor can it ping it down.
Yeah, so now he can't even cast the Bowmaster because he's just facing onboard lethal. So Boston just has to take a draw step here.
Yeah, Boston just in a very commanding lead. It's looking like these last 2 attacks here from Boston are just going to be the final nails in the coffin.
Yeah, Delver has to flip here, or there has to be some kind of answer for this Delver. But follow up Murktide, I think, is going to seal the game. There's no.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any combination that will get there. Brainstorm into double Pyroblast, and you have to somehow evade this counterbalance.
Yeah, so let's see what happens. Is there a flip? Is it an answer? There's a ponder. It
It
does flip.
starts there. I think you used to have to cast this Ponder now.
No, the problem is this fetch line just doesn't do anything.
Yeah, and Boston's going to get to see if the counterbalance works first.
It looks like it's not. I think Boston's the type of person that would just immediately flip it if it were.
Yeah, I agree with you.
I think he might just be considering the fetch, but it looks like Boston's just going to let it resolve.
I like this.
So there's a Wasteland, Murktide, and a Mishra's Bauble. I don't think any of those help at this point.
Yeah, you have to shuffle and look for Blast maybe, and then hope to block the
Yeah,
Delver. Would
so
you just concedes it?
Wajih going out on his own terms, cracking his fetch line, bringing him down to 0. That makes Boston the first season King of the North champion. So for those of you who have not been following along, that means from a select number of stores in the Southern Ontario region, Boston gets to play Legacy for free. And I think that also includes 1Ks as well, but I'm not too sure about that.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for having me on, Ben. I appreciate it a lot. It was this. Like I enjoyed watching these guys play. They're both very, very skilled players, and congratulations to Boston for winning the title of King of the North. And yeah, I mean, great match. I hope the viewers really enjoyed watching this as well. Yeah, looking forward to more Legacy for sure.
Yeah, so hopefully we can have you on for the next time we do this. Hopefully everything can be arranged. Maybe we'll hike up the production quality by just a little bit, but I make no promises, so can't call me out on the comment section. So I'll do my best. Kevin will do his best. That is it. I will be continuing my regular weekly Legacy videos. We're gonna go back to my lackluster commentary. So thank you all for joining us, and I hope you guys have a great weekend, whenever this video comes out. Have a good one, guys.
Have a good one, guys. Take care.